So today we have Len Caric as our speaker, who is the president and CEO of Uncle Charley's Sausage Company, a regional company located in Vandergrift, PA, whose products are sold in Shop and Save, Walmart, Aldi, and Giant Eagle. Len was previously the CEO of Pennsylvania Brewing Company and president of McKnight Cylinder. In addition to this, he is also a professor instructor at CMU. So Len, I'll let you get started.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. And as Allison mentioned, please make this interactive. If you have a question, you have a comment, by all means, just buzz in or raise your hand or whatever works on Zoom for you to get in. But this presentation is regarding entrepreneurship through acquisition. This is something that is really starting to get traction. And I want to share this with you and also encourage you that if you're at Tepper or on the Carnegie Mellon campus, you know, we've established a program where we have 4 classes. That's a path to entrepreneurship through acquisition. There's one that's called Entrepreneurship Alternatives, which gives you an overview of the paths. There's Entrepreneurship through Acquisition, Entrepreneurship through Acquisition Workshop, which follows that class. And then also there's a class on franchising. So I'm going to get started here by sharing the screen, a presentation that I have to go through with you. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship through acquisition. Yes, here we go. So if in dealing with entrepreneurship through acquisition, there's one question you want to ask yourself. Do you want to be a CEO? That's pretty simple. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the path through entrepreneurship to become a CEO. The question, why am I here? I'm here because I am a Tepper graduate and I did the entrepreneurship program here. And when I was here, there was no such thing as entrepreneurship through acquisitions, but there was a person by the name of Don Jones who started the Don Jones Center for Entrepreneurship, who I went to and said, you know, I have no ideas for the next great big startup. You know, Carnegie Mellon is known for its wonderful startups in all kinds of fields, but I don't have that type of creativity to go out and come up with the next great idea. So I needed a project for entrepreneurship and I didn't know what to do. So I turned to Don Jones and I said, Don, what am I going to do? He said, Len, it's very simple. He said, there's all these companies in Western Pennsylvania that are run by people that are in their late 60s or early 70s. They have no succession plans. They are very, very good companies, very solid companies. He said, find one, find an owner who's ready to retire, doesn't have succession plan, buy the company, grow it, and sell it. I thought that was like the greatest piece of advice I'd ever gotten. I thought, this is what I want to do. I don't know how to do startups, although I had done a couple of startups before that. But they only turned into mom and pop type operations. And I knew there was something more out there. So that's what became my project at Tepper. I worked at it. At that time, this is back in the 90s, there weren't the resources that are available today that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But nevertheless, this is what I wanted to do. And I tell you, there weren't the resources because it took me a little while to get this going. It took me about 3 to 4 years before I closed on the first company that I bought. But while I was at Tepper, I looked at several companies and I also ran into an investor who would later support me in the first acquisition. So I've now done 2 acquisitions and I've successfully sold both of those companies most recently. So the path to entrepreneurship, your options are basically a new venture creation. That's what everybody thinks about when they think about entrepreneurs. Somebody who comes up with a great idea or has an idea for a business they want to start and goes out and starts the business. Second, of course, is what we're going to talk about, business acquisition. Third is franchising. This is kind of a hybrid between business acquisition and starting your own company. You can go to a franchise and find a way to start the business and yet have a team behind you, a proven concept. I'm sure familiar with a lot of the franchises that are out there, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts. There's a host in the food space. But really, if there's any business you're interested in, there's probably a franchise for it. You'd be surprised. I come across businesses all the time now, and I wonder if that's a franchise, and a lot of times it is. And the other one is social entrepreneurship, which is working on some sort of a social cause. This is not doing a not-for-profit. This is a profit-driven business, but it has some social aspect around it. So what you have to think about is what appeals to you. What's your background? If you have a background where you can create something and you have an idea that might be a better product or a new product, then a new venture creation would be for you. You want to look at what are your skill sets. What skills do you have? And the reason I bring that up is because you're going to want to know what skills you're going to need. And those skill sets that you're going to need can either be acquired through a partnership with another person, or it could be acquired through hiring. So for instance, if you have a strong engineering background, and whether you start a new business or you go out and find a business that you operate, and maybe you have very good operational skills, but you're light on accounting and finance, well, that's what you want to look for. So you want to be very cognizant of your skill set. And then what do you like and what do you not like? That's very important. And I used to say, and for the most part, I'm interested in every business, but there are certain businesses that I just don't want to be in. And so you have to understand what it is you want to be in. Do you like retail? Do you prefer business to business? Do you prefer manufacturing to services? There's different ways to look at the types of business that you would be that would appeal to you. So what we're going to talk about today is basically business acquisition. The other three we're going to set aside for right now and talk about business acquisition. So recently there was a article in a Kiplinger magazine. I think I have it on one of the slides that says that over 25% of small businesses are owned by people that are 65 years and older. So that's a pretty big group that's out there. And basically, when you do an acquisition, it's a small private equity deal. So a lot of us are familiar with hearing about private equity companies. These are groups that have money to invest and they go around and look for acquisitions. You're basically doing the same thing on a smaller scale. And what I mean by smaller scale is typically you're looking for businesses that have $1 million to $5 million in EBITDA, that's earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization. Or to put it simpler, you're looking for companies that maybe are in the $5 million to say $12 or $15 million in revenue, that size of a company. The reason you want that size of a company is twofold. The first is if you go much above that, if you get into a company that's $20 million in revenue and above, you may bump into the private equity people. That's where they're coming. That's sort of the bottom rung of where they start to invest. And you probably don't want to mess with them. You want to be a little bit under the radar. The other reason is you want to look for businesses that have maybe 4 or 5 million in revenue, because you want to make sure that you have the ability to have a management team along with you. And the reason you want to do that is because as CEO, you want to be working on the business, not in the business. You don't want to be doing all of the actual work, but you want to be more on the strategy side, looking at things from a bigger picture and driving the business forward. So that's kind of where you want to be. And the steps are very simple. This is all you need to do. You raise money through debt and equity investments. You find a targeted company that where the owner is willing to sell, and they're willing to sell it to you at a price. And you do some due diligence on that company. You negotiate a deal and close. So that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? And through this, the skill sets you're using are strategy, finance, certainly negotiations, and an understanding of somewhat of the operations. Okay. Why would you do this? This is the good of business acquisitions. Probably one of the biggest ones is that it's more immediate results than a new venture creation. And what I mean by that is when you're buying a company that's already operating, the thing you have going for you is you have instant cash flow. You've heard these stories about startups where they're out raising money, they're raising money and they have no revenue coming in. That means no profits. That could mean no paycheck. These are the stories you hear about people that, you know, move to their parents' basement and they're eating peanut butter sandwiches every other day because there's no revenue yet. Now, those companies could take off and there could be a giant valuation. They could also die. But in this case, you're buying a business that has cash flow. The day you walk in, you have revenue, you have accounts receivable, and you have cash to operate the business. You are buying a business that already has customers in place, and you're buying a business that also already has employees in place. So you're basically stepping into a moving entity. And then this gives you the opportunity to work immediately on the plans to grow and improve the business. So you set up on a path, you look at a business that has some opportunities in it. And now, as I mentioned before, you start working on the business and how you're going to grow the business and improve it. The good news is there are thousands of targeted companies out there. As I mentioned, the newsletter I got that said that greater than 25% of small companies are now owned by people that are older than 65 years old. I was talking to a colleague this morning who told me that she's starting to recognize that people in their late 50s now are looking at selling their companies. So that only gets to be a larger pie, okay? And the good news is there's something for everybody. Whatever, as I mentioned earlier, if you like services, if you like business to business, if you like business to consumer, if you like manufacturing, if you like distribution, whatever you think you would enjoy doing, there's businesses out there. And what's really exciting about this path is that you don't really need a background in a specific industry. What you do need is just a skill set. And, you know, all businesses basically run the same if you think about it. There's somebody has to go out and create a sale, and whatever you're selling, you have to produce, whether that's a product or a service. You sell it for a profit margin, and you take care of delivering it to the customer. So the reason I say that is I've been in, my background is in sporting goods, telecommunications, propane cylinder reconditioning, which probably you've never heard of. As Allison mentioned earlier, I ran a small brewery for a while. I did some work with importing products from a plant that was owned in China. And I also make sausage currently. So you could see that you can get a very wide range of types of industries. But it all basically comes down to what are the fundamentals of running a business. Okay, there are some bads, okay? The first is the search process is generally long. It generally could, on average, would take 18 to 24 months to find a company, to find the right company, I should say. You'll find a lot of companies, but you want to find the right company, and then to negotiate the deal with the seller, and then eventually close on the business after negotiating a purchasing agreement. So there are a lot of steps in doing this that will sometimes makes for people to back out of it because it just takes long. And it's something where you'll look at an awful lot of businesses, and most won't be what you need to deal with. The other thing is there are thousands of targets, but only a dozen of good targets. And what you're looking for is profitable companies that also have growth opportunity in the future. There are a lot of businesses out there that are either struggling along or are pretty dormant, or they're in industries where you really can't find growth opportunities. And I would caution you to stay away from those because those are businesses that you're really maybe buying a job, not really something that can be grown. So because there's a lot of these companies out there, you got to sort through them and find out whether it's one that you want to pursue or not. And the thing about the ones that are good deals, they come along and they go very quickly. So the success depends on your relationship with sources. These are people that help you find businesses. and your ability to quickly evaluate and decide that that's the business you're going to buy. Because there's going to be probably other people sitting around on that are also looking at the business. And because it's a good business, there'll be people that will want to buy the business. So having the relationship with sources that can help you identify them quickly, and also being able to quickly evaluate whether you like the business or not, and then making a move. Now, part of making that move is that as you look for a business, you also need to be looking for investors if you can't fund the whole deal by yourself. So, entrepreneurship by acquisition. Why would you do it? As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the first question you asked yourself is, do you want to be a CEO? And I just had a guest speaker in my class this past week who started with that very question. And he runs a search fund that helps people find companies and buy companies. And his name is Tim Bavard. And I thought that was a great way to open a presentation. You just simply ask yourself, do you want to be a CEO? And what does that mean? Number one, it means leadership. It's leading an organization. So many people fall into working, and you've heard people talk about how, you know, if the boss would only listen to me, or I don't understand why the company is doing that, or all of these issues that come up when you're working for somebody. In this case, it all becomes you, and you become the leader of the organization. Certainly, there's a tremendous amount of independence. And, you know, what makes this interesting is if you decide this is what you want to do, there's only a small group of us that do this, because mostly people prefer to work in organizations where there's rules and structure. It makes it very, you can count on it. You know, you're getting a paycheck, hopefully. You know what your job is. You go into work, you know what you're supposed to accomplish, you know what your goals are, you work at those, you get paid for it. Most people like that. This is where it all becomes you. So you do have this great amount of independence, and that means that all of the decision making and the leading falls on you. So you have to weigh off that, the rules and structures, paycheck versus the independence. It's a constant high highs and low lows. You are constantly moving. I used to say by day, it's actually within the day. You can get something, you can go in with high expectations about something and find out that, you know, a truck's broken down in Ohio delivering something that needs to be at a customer in Indiana by tonight. Just constantly, there's highs and lows, and it never stops. But the exciting part about it is you get direct reward. You're making decisions, and you see how your decisions affect the business, positively and negatively. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes, absolutely, but that's just part of how you run the business and what you do, what your job is. But you learn from those mistakes. And the other thing I always tell people is get helpers. You know, in my classes, one of the biggest questions, or I guess one of the biggest issues students have, is they say they don't think they're ready to be a CEO. They don't think that they have no management skill sets. So they're nervous about taking on this responsibility. And I always say three things. Number one, generally, if you're at Carnegie Mellon, if you're at Tepper or at a school, you're pretty smart. So having intelligence goes a long, long way. Number two is you look for people to help you. Be humble and understand that you don't know it all. I tell the students that are nervous about running an organization that that's good, because that means that if they pursue this way of a career, then they know what their limitations are and they know what help they're going to need. So you surround yourself with people that can help you. That could be the investors. That could be an advisory board. I always look for people in the industry. So if I go into a new industry, I join the committees. Every business has some sort of trade group somewhere. I do my best to get on the board And that's purely to have people around me that are in the industry and understand the industry, that I can pick up the phone or send an email and ask a question and get help. So that's what you're surrounding yourself with. And I sort of diverged there a little bit, but I think that's a very important part, and it helps you with the direct reward. This type of work is different than satisfying a boss. This is satisfying investors. This is satisfying you. I can't tell you how fulfilling it is to see your products move into, or your services move into the commercial world, and to know that, or to win that one customer, or to see improvements in the way you do your products or services. It's very fulfilling. And aside from it being a job, it's not a job. It becomes who you are. It's what you think about, and it's what you do. It's who you are. It's fun because you're constantly learning, and anybody who is successful is always constantly learning. So you learn about industries that you never knew existed. If you choose this path, you could end up in a company that you didn't even know existed. I give you two examples. The first company that I was successful at buying reconditioned propane cylinders. I didn't know that industry existed. I didn't know that propane cylinders had a 12-year life and had to be recertified by a Department of Transportation licensed facility. I didn't know any of that. But once I started to learn about that business, I saw a lot of opportunity there. So, and in addition to that, you'll run into businesses through your search that you didn't know there. I had one of our speakers talk about, they ran into a business that takes care of the hoofs of dairy cattle. I didn't know that was important, but apparently it is. You get to use a lot of your intuition. It's not so much, I tell students that you have to be decisive, you have to make decisions, and you have to do that with as much information as you can gather. But every once in a while, you just got to go by what your gut's telling you. And you got to learn to trust that. You'll learn that you can take in information, and you'll understand your business, and then your intuition will help guide you. As I mentioned earlier, being humble is very, very, very important, and recognizing where it is that you need to grow and what associates you need to be with. And also curiosity. Certainly having a level of curiosity helps tremendously, because it allows you to always be thinking about what are the opportunities for your business. Question always comes up, should you do it? Probably one of the biggest things you got to make sure is that either your spouse or your significant other is in. They have to buy into this concept, because as I said, it becomes who you are. And it's things that you're constantly working on, and you have to make sure that your partner in life is willing to go along for the ride. I'm very fortunate in that my wife is always open to whatever I'm doing. She used to say that the definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who'll do anything they can not to get a regular job. Might be true, but having that support is very, very important. And I'll talk about that a little bit down here when I talk about colleagues. But that's one thing you got to make sure is that whoever your life partner is, that they're in on this path. There could be a loss of salary and benefits. Students coming out of Tepper can signing bonuses, get six-figure salaries, all of that. But you could be going into a smaller company and taking less salary. The benefits might not be as good as what some of the big corporations offer. But you have to understand that, salary when you're doing this is not what it's all about. It's all about a business and who you are and what your exit is. You're building equity in a company for yourself. You have equity in the company. And when you either divest or distribute profits in the year, that's all part of what you get. So that's what becomes the exciting part from a financial starting point. You have to decide if you want to be part of a big brand or if you want to be the CEO and owner. And I have a brother who works for Duncan. He used to work for Hallmark. He loves being part of a big brand, and he likes being part of a brand that people know about. And that's perfect for him. On the other hand, I've always, I'm generally the CEO or owner of a company. And there's a group of people that have that title, and that's what you move into. The one thing I tell everybody is you absolutely can do this. As I mentioned, students a lot of times are nervous that they can't manage, they don't understand an industry, all of these reasons. The fact is you can do it. And here's what I usually tell people, and it's so true, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way. The people running a lot of these successful businesses are probably not as smart as you are. And again, I don't say that in putting these people down, because they've grown businesses, they're very, very successful, and they've worked very hard, and they've learned along the way. To give you an example, the person who started Uncle Charley's Sausage before we bought it, Charley Armitage, he started it in 1988. He was 58 years old at the time. He had sold vacation property along a lake. He had driven a big bulldozer or something at a strip mining facility for a couple of years. He worked in his father's grocery store, and he sold spices. And so he didn't have a career that you would think would lead him to starting a sausage company, growing it to the largest or the number one brand in Western Pennsylvania, and selling it for a good price. I know, because we bought it. So I'm confident that if you're on this, you can do this. It's something that can be done. I mentioned earlier about having a spouse that's bought in. One of the things is when you're in this type of a business, you do lose colleagues, but the colleagues become different. So instead of being at a work environment where you're working with a group of people that are all peers, you now are in a different area. A lot of what you want to discuss or things that you're working on can't be shared with the people in the company, that you just lose that. But that's where the benefit of having a partner, your life partner, that's where having that benefit, because they can become your sounding board. Also, you start to look for people that are doing what you're doing, that are CEOs. Those become your colleagues, and those are the people that you have discussions with around issues that you're dealing with, or ends up being even on a social aspect. You have to understand that you're not going to have departments. People that come out of the corporate world where there's a human resource department, a marketing department, a research and development department, they have all of those tools. And that's something that you may not have. You may be the HR department, or you may have somebody who does HR and accounting, or you might be the marketing department. These are things that small businesses can't afford to have. But it also gives you an understanding of everything that's going on in the business, and it also gives you an opportunity to work on different parts of the business and understand that. I always have this quote over here about making payroll, and here's what I mean about that. If you come from a corporate environment, then you never worry about where payroll's coming from. You never worry where the paychecks are coming from. But when you're running a company, that's one of your number one responsibilities, is managing cash and making sure that you can pay your employees. And sometimes it's Monday afternoon and you have $100,000 in the bank, and on Thursday evening, ADP, your payroll service, is going to pull out $110,000 to make payroll. And you got to make sure that you're managing the business properly to do that. So cash becomes the most important thing in these small businesses. And if you can't take that kind of pressure and understanding, then this might not be for you. As I mentioned, using intuition becomes very, very important. I can tell you, I can right now go to 3 decisions that I made where I didn't follow my intuition, and they were bad decisions. They, I don't want to say they cost, but they did cost the company something to get away from. But it's fun to be able to be buried in your thoughts and to listen to what can help guide you. Being decisive. I ran into a person, he's actually the person that bought Uncle Charley's, and he comes from a military background. And when I was first getting to know him, what I thought was real interesting is he was talking to me about being a platoon commander in Afghanistan. And the parallel was very similar to running a business like this. And I have never been in the military. I never chose that path, but he did. But what he told me is, when you're running a platoon, you have to make decisions very, very quick. And you take in all of the information that you can, and you go with something. You don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. You don't study it for the next 6 months. And that's what becomes so exciting about being a CEO in these small businesses, is you get to be decisive. Is you might not have all the information available, but you have common sense and you have enough information that you've gathered that you can make a decision. So one of the qualities you got to make sure you have is being able to be decisive. Certainly having energy. This is not for those who like to sleep in, I can tell you that. But that energy breeds itself when you close a new customer, when you get the products out on time, when you overcome an obstacle. That energy just feeds you, and that energy is always there. I have to tell you that in this business, in these small businesses, you're constantly selling. It's selling, selling, selling. And I have students say to me, well, I don't have sales experience, or I don't want to go out and do a sales presentation. That's not what I'm necessarily talking about. It's selling to investors. It's selling to the employees. It's selling to customers. It's selling to the outside market. It's constantly selling what you're doing. And you don't have to have experience. You just have to be in the position of where the company becomes a part of who you are. And once it becomes a part of who you are, you can't help but talk about the company. And the one thing I will tell you, and I could speak from experience, is once you're in on this path, there's no going back. Once you choose this type of a path of running a business and being the CEO, I don't know anybody who does anything different afterwards. So here becomes the 2 big things as far as finding a business to run and become a CEO. The first is investors. If you don't have enough money to go out and buy the business on your own, and we're talking about businesses that are going to cost several $1 million, then you're going to need investors. There will be a portion that you can finance with banks, and there's also this thing called mezzanine financing, which is a bridge between banks and equity. But you're going to have investors involved. And who are those investors? The first could be friends and family. That's fine, but I always caution people to be very, very careful here. Will the business and will the investment survive Thanksgiving dinner with the family? That's a question you have to ask. Are you going to have friends who invest who now think that they're the CEOs of the company? Even though they only invested enough to own 5 or 10% of the business, all of a sudden they think that they could be making decisions, or that they could be giving you a heck of a lot of advice that you don't need. So you got to be very, very careful there, because the other thing that can happen is friendships and family relationships can be ruined. So I use this one and I talk about it because I know people that have been successful with having parents invest, etc. But I just tell you just to be careful. That's all. Grandma loves you and probably would give you all the money she has to support you. But just remember, that's all the money grandma has. And if things don't work out as well as you think they're going to, then You don't want to bust grandma. But going into other ones, these are the ones where you really want to concentrate, is former business associates, people that you know that have been successful, people that are working somewhere and are developing some investment cash. These are people that you can talk to. Business owners, people that are doing what you are going to do. These people really get it. They understand what it takes to run a small business. They understand about investing in small businesses, and they want to invest in small businesses. They want to take a portion of their money and invest. And well, the next thing is high net worth individuals. These are people that maybe have sold a business. These are people that maybe are professionals, attorneys, doctors, et cetera, that again have had a very successful career and have a lot of money. These are people that will invest. Again, they're investing as investors do. They're diversifying their account, their cash. They're putting some cash in the stock market, some in bonds, and they're putting some into small companies. Family offices. These are sometimes difficult to find, but family offices tend to invest in small companies. These are families that maybe have run a business, maybe multi-generational, and they eventually sell the business. And so they create what they call family office. This is an office that's going to manage their money. It's going to manage basically their lives, and they're putting money to work with small businesses. Search fund funders. Don't try to say that 3 times fast. These are people that are out there funding people like you who want to go out and search for a company. When I was doing that whole concept of search fund didn't even exist. It really came out of Stanford in around 2000. There's a white paper on it out of Stanford's business school, where people started to invest in people that were looking for a business. So what that means is we now have students that go out and raise a search fund, and they go out and talk to investors. Investors give them anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 to go out, and their job then becomes to go out and find a business. And remember, it takes 18 to 24 months. So, you're basically paying yourself a salary, you have benefits, and you're using some of that money as working capital to go out and search for a business. The best thing you can do as far as looking for investors is network. People say to me, well, where do you find the family offices? Well, there's no directory that says family offices and list them. You got to go out and you got to talk to people. You just need to constantly be networking with people that you know. And one of the ways you always close a meeting with somebody you know is to say, who do I talk to next? And allow that person to lead you to the next one. And then, of course, the next thing is to network. I don't know if I mentioned that. Networking. I'm very, very big on networking. And by the way, when I talk about networking for finding investors or finding businesses or all that, that's not where it starts. Whatever your career path is, I encourage you to always, always be networking with people that are in your industry, in your business, people that can network you to somebody else. I mean, the whole concept of LinkedIn, the social website for business people, was created with that very, very thing in mind. Okay. With investors, though, you got to make sure you're able to work with them. You want to interview investors like they interview with you. You want to make sure that you're comfortable with who they are, and that you can get along with them, basically. But the nice thing about investors is they bring something besides cash. They become a sounding board. You want to look for investors that when you're struggling with something in your business that you can call and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. What do I do? Again, that's where the humility piece comes in. And that's where having the helpers comes in. I tell the students in my class, it's Mr. Rogers said a long time ago, and I look for the helpers. And that's what you want to do with this. You want to look for people that have been there before, people that are doing it, people that have more years experience than you. When I got into the sausage business, there was a crisis that hit the pork sausage business. And fortunately, while I was doing due diligence on buying Uncle Charley's, I found a person who had been in the business for 35 years. So I called him and I said, Jim, what the heck's going on? What do I do? We just bought this business. There's a crisis hitting us. And he succinctly told me what to do and told me what the outcome is going to be. And 2 years later, he was exactly right. So those are the types of people you look for, and that's what you look for in investors. The other thing investors are good for is introductions to banks, to other investors, and to the professionals. So when you're going to buy a business, as I mentioned, you're going to need debt funding. If somebody has a relationship with a banker, that goes a long way, as opposed to you setting up an appointment on a blind call where they don't know you, you don't know them. It's a big help if an investor gives you an introduction to a banker, and the bankers want to work with those investors. The other thing investors do is they bring other investors. Investors are like venture capitalists. They like to invest where everybody else invests. They don't want to be the lone investor. So they like to have diversity in their businesses that they invest in. So again, one of the things you do is when you talk to investors is ask, who should I be talking to next? And they'll usually give you a lead. And again, they lead you to the professionals that can help you: attorneys, accountants, insurance brokers, the host of people that you'll need to go through this process. Sellers. Sellers can be investors. You could ask the seller to lend you money to buy the business. It's called a seller's note. And that becomes part of an investor as well. And the other thing that your investors do is they can bring you sellers. They may know somebody that they interact with, or know through their accountant somebody who's selling their business. So there becomes that as well. So the investors bring support. They could be part of the board of directors. Generally, people that make large investments want to be a part of the board of directors. And they can be very, very helpful early on in running the company. Now, I will tell you, they are not your boss. They are not the person looking over your shoulder, micromanaging you. All the investors I've run into, they don't want to work these businesses day to day. They're fine with getting monthly financial statements. They're fine with quarterly board meetings. They're fine with knowing that much. They're also fine when you're in a problem, giving them a call. So it's just a great resource. The second big problem is searching. How do you find these companies? Well, there's two professionals that are out there. There's investment bankers that will put businesses up for sale, and there's business brokers. Business brokers who go around and find companies or owners that want to sell their companies. This becomes a source of where you can find people to help you find the businesses. Now, the problem with those is they're showing it to a lot of people. So now you're in a competitive mode. You can also talk to professionals that are CPAs, financial planners, attorneys. A friend of mine just recently told me that through a financial planner, they found somebody, and I spelled it wrong, that somebody told them that their financial planner was working with an owner that wanted to sell a business. And that led him to starting to engage with that business. You could do direct contact. This is where I talk about next having a thesis. A thesis is where you say, I'm going to look at these three industries, or I'm going to look in this geographical area, or I'm going to look in this size of business, or I'm going to look at only service businesses. And then you run a list, and you can pull together a list of these types of companies and directly contact the owner and say, are you thinking about selling? Or do you know anybody that's thinking about selling? And you start to build a network with owners of businesses. And again, it goes down to networking. It's talking. It's talking to the people that are business owners. It's talking to people that support business owners, like financial planners, attorneys, and CPAs. That you just want to build out that network. And you never know when that network's going to call you. And I don't know if I mentioned it, networking is very, very important. The two companies that I bought, Uncle Charley's and originally McKnight Cylinder, both came through networking. And by the way, the first business, I was the only buyer. Okay, I've done an awful lot of talking. I tried to hit some of the high points, but what I'd like to do now is open it up for a discussion on some of the things that I talked about. So are there any questions, comments? Do you think I don't know what I'm talking about? Do you think this is something for you? Anything. I can't tell you what the lottery number is going to be tonight, though. No questions? Anybody interesting? Anybody from Carnegie Mellon interested in taking our classes? No? Okay. You want to, Jerry, you want to hear about one of my acquisitions? Sure, I'd be happy to tell you. I could be talking for the next, 24 to 27 hours on these acquisitions. I can go back to the first one. The first one was I was looking to buy a business. I ran into two guys, Mel and Fred. This is back in the 90s when I was at Tepper, and they were tire kickers. They were tire kickers, not me. They thought it was interesting. I was looking at buying a business, and they wanted to talk to me and just see what their business was worth. Unfortunately, what the money they wanted was not what the business was worth. So I told them that. I said, this is what the business is worth. Unfortunately, they both wanted to exit the business with $2 million each. The business was not worth that. It almost wasn't worth $2 million by itself. And so, we decided, well, I'll stay in touch. I looked at that business 3 times after that. So 4 times from 1993 to as recent as 2015, I looked at buying that business. And we never came to an agreement, but they became good friends. And one day I was at their office back in the 90s, and Fred said to me, here, you're looking for a business? I got this letter from a business broker selling a business. Maybe you want to buy that. Happened to be the company that I eventually bought. So I got in touch with Fred and Mel through a person who was helping companies in Western Pennsylvania with secession. That's how I got introduced to them. I became friends with them. They ended up giving me a lead of a business that came unsolicited to them. That was my first business I bought. And that business buying was painful. It took, I first visited that company in June, and we didn't close on the business till the following September. Most business acquisitions take 4 to 6 months. That's about what they take, because you got to do due diligence, you got to learn about the business, you got to get financing, all of that. This took way too long. And the reason being is we were supposed to close in January, and the owner developed seller's remorse, they call it. It's where, they think they want to sell the business, and then when somebody's ready to buy the business, they're not sure they want to sell the business. So you just got to be, and then you have to hold their hand all the way through the process to get them there. So that was an interesting thing. And I'll tell you one more thing, and before I go to the next question, I'd worked on that business 18 months to close it, and it almost blew up at the closing table. I won't go into the boring details of that story, but I was sitting there thinking, all this work I put into this, here's my dream to buy this business, and it's going to end right now. Fortunately, it did not end. I tell everybody, you don't have a deal until the money moves. When the money moves from your account to their account, now you got a deal. Up until that point, you don't. Go ahead. Let me get some of these other questions. Are there different types of business brokers? Yes, there are people that are in certain industries, and then there are people that'll do anything. And there are good business brokers and bad business brokers. They get paid a commission. They want to move the business. So you get good business brokers that will help you with the owner. They'll work for you. They'll get the due diligence question answered. They earn their money. And then you got business brokers that basically are sending out blast emails saying, hey, you want to buy this business? Here, you want to buy the business? Fine. So yeah, you got to be careful about who the business brokers are. And as you said, and I said, they do certainly concentrate, some do concentrate in certain industries. Generally, they are business brokers are in that maybe 5 million revenues and down. You give above 5 million in revenues, 7 million in revenues, you really deal with investment bankers. And those are truly the professionals in selling the businesses. what are my thoughts about valuation companies as source of leads? I'm not sure I understand that question. Thoughts about valuation companies as source of leads? I can tell you that any source is a good lead. Your sister-in-law is a good lead. Bankers are good leads. Anybody who can give you some sort of direction or push you to or introduce you to somebody selling their business, that's a good lead. Oh, companies that do business valuation as a professional service. Absolutely. They'll tell you what the business is worth too at the same time. So yes, as I said, anybody you could find that can lead you to a seller is good. The way I financed the first business, I found an investor, found a family office. That investor is my business partner on the first business, and we did well enough together then we bought the second business together too. So, and part of that also was bank financing. And again, my business partner, his name's Jim Rudolph, he had banking connections. I had to do the show the financials and do the work with the bank, but I had an introduction to a bank. The bank had dealt with him on other deals, so they thought if he's in, they're in too. So that was easy as far as getting bank financing. Exit. So the question is, what is the exit strategies for the companies I bought? That is an excellent question. And I'm going to go back to my friend Don Jones, who said to me that morning, after I told him about buying the business, he said to me, who are you going to sell it to? And I said, Don, I just bought it a week ago. What are you asking me this? He said, Len, he said, in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, maybe 20 years, you're going to sell this business. And you got to figure out along the way who you're going to sell it to. And you're going to have to help them along to buy the business. They don't know they're going to buy your business. So I took that to heart. And within a year, I identified 2 companies that were going to buy our first business, McKnight Cylinder. And we eventually sold to one of them. You start to get the company in that mode that somebody's going to want to buy it. And you think about who is that one. And I always like strategic buyers. So there's 3 types of buyers. There's financial buyers, which I generally am. I'm a financial buyer. I go in, I look at the cash flow of the business, I put a multiple on it, and that's what we're going to pay for the business. The strategic buyer, that's somebody who's in the industry, and they see your business as a 1 + 1 = 2. The 2 companies that I've sold to strategic people. And that adds value to your exit because they look at your EBITDA, but they're willing to pay a little bit more, sometimes a lot more, because your company fits something that they're working on. So the first company I sold, we sold to our largest customer. And by the way, when we bought the business and when Don asked me, who am I going to sell it to a week after we bought it, they were not a customer. But in the first year, I started to work with them and I decided they were going to be a good exit strategy. And I worked very hard on that relationship so that we were able to sell the business to them. Another part of the exit strategy is, as I mentioned earlier, I get involved in the industry. I get on the industry boards. I join all the groups that are associated with the industry because that's where all the strategic buyers are sitting. That's where all the companies like yours are there. Uncle Charley's, I met the buyer through a board, the Eastern Meat Packers Association. I found out that he was a new member because he had just bought a company. I got to know him. I found out he bought a second company, found out he bought a third company. I thought, this guy's in the buying mood. I should talk to him. So that's the way you gotta work on how you get that out. Any other questions? Allison, I want to be very respectful of everybody's time. I would encourage anybody through Allison, you can get my contact information if you want to have a follow-up. I tell all of my students, and now I'll tell you, I'm yours for life. So if you decide you're going to do this 3 years from now, you can email me or call me and say, hey, Len, I was on that presentation and I've been thinking about it for 3 years and now I'm ready. I'll be there to help you.